You know that feeling, right? When you're in a situation and something just feels off. Something's said, the air goes still, and suddenly everyone's stuck on this one single question. Was that racist? But what if that's the wrong question entirely? Today, we're going to dig into a framework that helps us move way beyond that dead end. See, the problem starts with that very question. It forces us into what you could call a binary trap. Something is either 100% racist or it's not racist at all. And this approach isn't just unhelpful. The source material argues it's actively harmful because it leaves absolutely no room for subtlety, for context, or for the very real psychological impact of what just happened. So what happens when an experience doesn't fit neatly into that racist box? Well, a lot of the time we turn inward. We start asking ourselves these really destabilizing questions. The uncertainty itself can end up being even more confusing and damaging than straight-up hostility. And this right here is the core of the problem. We're not just talking about awkward conversations. This ambiguity creates a kind of fog where real harm goes unnamed, leaving the person who experienced it questioning their own reality. And that is a heavy, heavy psychological burden to carry.
This slide just lays out the two paths so clearly. On one side, you've got that binary thinking. When someone gets labeled racist, what happens? The instinct is usually defensiveness, blame, and it just shuts the whole conversation down. But on the other side, spectrum thinking, well, that invites reflection, responsibility, and the actual possibility for genuine growth.
Okay, so how do we get to that second path? How do we make that shift? This is where a really interesting psychological tool comes into play, one that's designed to give us clarity and a real way forward.
It's called the Prejudice Racism Spectrum, or PRS for short. Now, this was developed by Dr. Shungu M'gadzah, and it basically says that bias isn't some on-off switch. It operates along a continuum, a whole spectrum of behaviors, awareness, and importantly, responsibility.
And here it is, the spectrum itself. I know, it's a lot to take in at first, so let's just walk through it together. Over on the far left, in red, you'll see overt hostility. We're talking direct racism, harassment. As we move toward the middle, you see more subtle behaviors, things like microaggressions, gaslighting, maybe even just being unaware of your own biases. And then as we keep moving to the right, the whole spectrum shifts towards positive action, speaking up, challenging things, and ultimately proactive allyship.
And this is what makes the spectrum so powerful. It gives us a language, a place to locate behaviors that simple racist or not question just completely misses. Things like uncomfortable banter, or even just being silent when something happens. They're now recognized as part of this continuum. It creates a shared language so we can talk about what's actually happening.
So what makes this tool so effective? It all comes down to one critical shift in our focus. Instead of getting tangled up in debating what someone meant to do, it asks us to look at what actually happened.
This quote from Dr. M'gadzah just gets right to the heart of it. By focusing on impact, pattern, and responsibility, the conversation moves away from someone's unknowable internal state, their intention, and instead focuses on an observable, measurable reality.
And the great thing is, this isn't just some abstract idea. The framework gives us 4 concrete questions to ask. First, just the facts. What happened? Second, how did it land? How did it affect the person on the receiving end? Third, does this form a pattern or is it a one-off? And finally, given the impact in the pattern, what responsibility follows? It's a clear, practical method to work through.
Now, the ultimate outcome of using a framework like this is really profound. It's about creating an environment of clarity, which, it turns out, is the foundation for genuine psychological safety. That feeling of being safe enough to speak up, ask questions, and even make mistakes without being terrified of punishment or humiliation.
And honestly, this right here is the game changer. For the person who has experienced harm, the spectrum provides a map. It helps end that internal confusion and self-doubt. It shifts the question from self-blame, what's wrong with me, to objective analysis, what is happening here? And that shift alone is an incredible act of restoring psychological safety.
So how does it actually build this safety? Well, you can think of it in 3 key ways. First, it takes that tangled mess of uncertainty and gives it a name, which immediately reduces its power. Second, it validates a person's experience without forcing them to prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt. And third, and this one is so important, it separates the person from their behavior, which lets us address the action without it feeling like a personal attack that just makes everything explode.
And this isn't just for individuals. It's just as powerful on a bigger, organizational level. Instead of a whole company shutting down defensively, this framework allows for reflection without a total collapse. It allows an organization to take responsibility without being paralyzed by shame, and that creates a real path towards systemic change. So, as we start to wrap this up, it's absolutely essential to remember the purpose of this whole spectrum. It's designed to build things up, not to tear them down. It's a tool for navigating a complex world, not a weapon for accusation.
Let's be super clear about this. The goal isn't to find a new, more sophisticated way to label people. It's about using this shared language to create clarity. And it's that clarity that reduces defensiveness and opens the door for everyone to actually participate in meaningful change.
And that brings us to the final thought I want to leave you with. When we have the tools to see a situation clearly, to name it without blame, and to really understand its impact, we create the conditions for real progress. This explainer has laid out the framework, and so the final question is really for all of us. How can we use this kind of clarity to build a more psychologically safe future in our own workplaces, schools, and communities?